Hi, my name is Venu. I'm working as an associate professor in Lendi Institute of Engineering and Technology. In this video, we are going to see about the React components. What are React components? React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. React is a declarative, efficient, and flexible JavaScript library for building user interfaces. It lets you compose complex UIs from small and isolated pieces of code called components. React has a few different kinds of components, but we will start with React.component subclasses. React components are declarative. React makes it painless to create interactive UIs. Design simple views for each state in your application, and React will efficiently update and render just the right components when your data changes. Declarative views make your code more predictable and easier to debug. Component based. Build encapsulated components that manage their own state, then compose them to make complex UIs. Since component logic is written in JavaScript instead of templates, you can easily pass rich data through your app and keep state out of the DOM. Learn once, write anyway. We don't make assumptions about the rest of your technology stack. So you can develop new features in React without rewriting existing code. React can also render on the server using Node and power mobile apps using React Native. Now we'll see a simple component. Here we are going to define a class component. So the name of the class component is hello message, and this class component should extend the react.component. So in React, whenever you want to create a class component, you should extend the parent class called react.component. And we use the render method for rendering the content in the browser. So here in the render method, we are returning the HTML content. So in the HTML content, we are using the div tag for displaying some message like hello, and the whatever the name that you pass as props to this message will be displayed over there. For example, if you pass the name as Ramu as a props, that Ramu will be displayed over there. So finally, the output you whatever the output that you will get is hello Ramu. So whenever you want to invoke this component or whenever you want to use this component, you should invoke that component by using the HTML format. So here you have to call that component like a hello message, and you can also pass the name of the props as a Taylor. So finally here we will get the output as hello Taylor. React components implement a render method that takes input data and returns what to display. This example uses an XML-like syntax called JSX. Input data that is passed into the component can be accessed by render via this dot props. JX is optional and not required to use React. Now we will see another example of the component. It is nothing but a stateful component. So here we are defining a timer component, which is nothing but a class component, and this timer component extends the react.component as earlier. So here we are using the constructor, and this constructor takes the arguments props as arguments, and we are also calling the super constructor, okay, the constructor of the superclass, and this we are initializing the variable called state. Okay, so we are initializing it to 0 seconds, this dot state 0 seconds, and we are defining another method tick. So here we are setting the state of the method using the tick method. Okay. So here we are incrementing the seconds by 1. So whenever this tick method is invoked, the seconds will be incremented by 1. Now coming to the another method, component did mount. Here we are using the interval variable, and we are setting that interval variable to 1000. That means we know that 1 second is equal to 1000 milliseconds. So here we are using that logic to increment the interval by 1000 milliseconds. So whenever you call this component, timer component, this interval will be incremented. Okay. So another method that we are going to define is a component will unmount. So whenever you want to clear the interval, then we can call this component will unmount method, and it will be reset. The interval variable value will be reset. So whenever you want to display some message, as we discussed earlier, we are going to use the render method. By using the render method, we can display the content in our browser, and it returns the HTML code. So here we are going to display the seconds. Okay, whenever you call this component, timer component. So how would you call the timer component? By using the root.render, and we are calling the timer component. Whenever you call the timer component, the seconds will be displayed. Value for the seconds will be displayed over here. In addition to taking input data accessed via this props, a component can maintain internal state data accessed via this dot state. So here we can use the data, or we can represent the data either by using the props or by using the state. Okay. So when a component's state data changes, the rendered markup will be updated by reinvoking the render method. So whenever the data of the component changes or state of the component changes, the render method will be reinvoked. Now let us see the difference between props and the state in React. Props are immutable and states are mutable. What does it mean? The first thing to note is that props are read-only and are immutable, while state changes asynchronously and is mutable. So a state can change over time, and this change can happen as a response to a user action or a system event. So state can only be accessed or modified inside the component. JX, JSX. The HTML code in React.js uses JSX, which allows you to write HTML tags inside the JavaScript code. For example, create a variable that contains HTML code and display it in the app component. You will see the syntax of the JS. So here we are creating a variable called person, which is declared as constant, and we are assigning some HTML code to that variable person. So here we have defined a table, and the table having 2 rows, and each row having 2 data elements, first name, last name, and the data elements are John, Elisa. So we have defined the table, and it is assigned to the variable called person. And whenever you want to use that variable, you can use in JSX syntax. Similarly, we want to define a list of the fruits. So for that one, we have created one variable called fruits, and we are using the HTML code for defining the list of the fruits like apples, bananas, cherries. One top level element. So the HTML code must be wrapped in one top level element. So if you like to write 2 paragraphs, you must put them inside a parent element like a div element. In React, okay, whenever you want to display multiple elements, you must wrap into the one top level element. So here is the example. We are having 2 paragraph tags. Okay. If you directly assign the two paragraphs to the one variable called myElement, then you will get an error. So what we need to do is we have to enclose those two paragraphs into one top level element that is called the div tag. Here we are using the div tag for enclosing the two paragraph tags. JSX will throw an error if the HTML is not correct or if the HTML misses a parent element. Alternatively, you can use a fragment to wrap multiple lines. Previously, we have seen how you can wrap multiple tags in one top level element that is called div. Alternatively, we can also use the fragment tag. So the syntax of the fragment tag looks like an empty HTML tag. Here is the example of for the fragment tag. We want to wrap two paragraph tags into one fragment tag. Okay. This is an example of the fragment. Elements must be closed. JSX follows XML rules and therefore HTML elements must be properly closed. Here is the example. We must close the empty elements with a slash. Okay. So here we have defined one variable called myElement and we have initialized the variable with HTML tag input type text. But generally input tag will not have a closing tag in HTML. So what we need to do, we have to add the slash at the end of the input tag to represent this is as the closed tag. So the input tag must be closed if you want to follow the JSX rules. JSX throw an error if the HTML is not properly closed. That's why we have to close the empty elements with a slash. Attribute class equal to class name. The class attribute is a much used attribute in HTML. But since JSX is rendered as a JavaScript and the class keyword is a reserved word in JavaScript, you are not allowed to use it in JSX. So we use attribute class name instead. JSX solved this by using class name instead. When JSX is rendered, it translates class name attributes into class attributes. Now let us see one example. Here we are using the attribute class name for the h1 element or h1 tag. But generally in HTML, when you want to declare the h1 element, we use the class and we can define our own class. But here in JSX, you cannot use the class directly. So what we need to do, we have to use the class name for attribute. Okay. So this is how we can use the class name in JSX syntax. Conditions, if statements. React supports if statements but not inside JSX. To be able to use conditional statements in JSX, you should put the if statements outside of the JSX, or you could use a ternary expression instead. Okay. So first of all, let us see option 1. Write if statements outside of the JSX code. Here is the example. Suppose if you want to print hello if x is less than 10. Otherwise, you can print the goodbye message. So that can be represented like this. Constant x is initialized to 5. Let text is equal to goodbye. Okay. And we will check the condition. If x less than 10, if then text is initialized to hello. So whenever you call this component, okay, so the output will be, because 5 is less than 10, so hello will be printed. Coming to the option 2, we can use the ternary expressions in JSX. So here the previous example can be represented like this. Constant x is equal to 5, constant my element equal to h1 tag. So here we are using the ternary expression. If x less than 10, hello will be printed. If x is not less than 10, goodbye will be printed. So note that in order to embed a JavaScript expression inside JSX, the JavaScript must be wrapped with curly braces. React components. Components are independent and reusable bits of code. They serve the same purpose as JavaScript functions, but work in isolation and return HTML. Components come in two types, class components and function components. In older React code bases, you may find class components primarily used. It is now suggested to use function components along with hooks, which were added in React 16.8. Thank you.